I travel a lot on business, and when I travel about, I love to take photos of buildings and of people and of scenes in the city, street photographs of the places that I'm visiting. But the question is it legal for me to take pictures of people's faces and post them online? Hi, my name is Carr Ferrell. I'm a Silicon Valley intellectual property attorney. Welcome back to my channel. Yes, in the United States, you're allowed to film in public. You're allowed to stand in public spaces and take pictures of whatever you can observe. And you're entitled to take pictures from those public spaces of things that you can observe that are not in the public spaces. Now, some people might say this right to take photographs in public is a constitutional right. Now, the argument goes like this. I have a constitutional right to say what I want to say in public, a right to communicate my thoughts and my beliefs in a public forum for others to hear and to benefit from. Now, the Supreme Court has long taken the position that expression, that is speech, doesn't necessarily need to be talking speech. It can be other forms of expression. For example, carrying a picket sign might be a form of free speech. And likewise, my taking and communicating photographs might also be a form of free speech. But what's different about my photographs that may not give me the constitutional protection of the right to take pictures in public, the free speech right, is that really I don't have the intention of communicating my photographs, you see, because I just use my photographs for personal use, my own enjoyment. So they're not really taken for the intent of communicating. And therefore, I might not get all of the constitutional rights associated with true free speech. Okay, but even if my right to take photographs doesn't rise to a constitutional level, I still have a very strong right to take pictures in public. Now, what is public? Well, a public space is a place where people can come and go freely. They're free to walk through, they're free to congregate. We think of public streets as public spaces, public sidewalks are public spaces, squares are public spaces, areas around airports have been held to be public spaces, as well as train stations and the like. So there really are a lot of public spaces from which to take photographs. Now, there are some limitations on the right to take photographs in public. Now, these limitations fall into a category that's often referred to as time, place, and manner in constitutional law. I don't always have the right to stand in the middle of the street and take a photograph. This limitation on the right to take photographs is sort of tied to the right of free speech, where I'm really not allowed, for example, to scream fire in a crowded theater because people may get hurt. So there's a time, place, manner restriction on my speech. That is, there may not be times when I'm allowed to exercise my right of free speech, and that might be at night next to a hospital in a quiet zone, for example, where protesting at night might be prohibited. Or, for example, there may be some places that are inappropriate for me to exercise free speech, and likewise inappropriate for me to take photographs. An example of this might be in a polling place, where it's important to give voters the right to exercise their constitutional right to choose a government. For example, border searching areas where people's suitcases are being examined, and it seems reasonable not to allow photographers in taking pictures of everybody's underwear and socks. And it's easy to think of other places such as military bases and the inside of jails where keeping photographers and the public out may be an appropriate constraint on our right of free speech and free expression. And the third part of this time, place, manner limitation relates to manner. And manner just means the way that I go about exercising my free speech. For example, it may be perfectly okay for me to take my Instamatic camera and take pictures from the street, or take selfies using my smartphone. But launching a drone in the middle of Times Square, for example, might cause traffic to snarl even worse and might not be an appropriate manner in which to photograph the area. Now, interestingly, this right to photograph also includes the right to photograph from public spaces into private spaces. For instance, it's perfectly legal for me to stand in the middle of the street and take pictures of people dining in sidewalk cafes or inside restaurants through the window, for example. Or I can shoot pictures through someone's apartment window or a store window. Anything I can see from the street, I'm entitled to photograph. Now, going back to the time, place, manner limitation to street photography and to expression in general, when there's an accident on the street, it may be that the police ask me to step back with my camera to give them room to work. This would be a time, place, manner limitation. They need their space to do their job, and my constitutional right to take pictures in that moment may be trumped by their need to protect public safety. Somewhat distantly related to the time, place, manner requirement of free speech is the requirement in some communities that you have a permit to take photographs commercially in the street or in public places. There's lots of stories on the internet where photographers with their fancy cameras and big tripods and complex gimbals have been stopped on the street for a permit check. Security guards or public officials want to check and make sure you have the proper permit for photographing in that specific place. Now, the normal reason for requiring these permits, aside from the permit fees that municipalities and localities collect for the privilege of filming commercially in that public place, is to protect the safety of both the public and of the crew that's working on this commercial project. For example, when applying for the permit, there'll often be verification of workman's compensation and tax payments and meeting certain safety requirements associated with the project. If you get hassled by somebody asking to see your commercial permit, generally just explaining that you're a hobbyist is sufficient. However, it does seem to add some additional complication if you explain that you're a YouTuber or you're preparing a video for your YouTube channel, because this can easily be seen as a commercial project. Although honestly, anybody who's been a YouTuber knows that often it doesn't feel like much of a commercial business. Distinguished from private or personal use is the use of my photographs for commercial purposes in promotion of a business or service. For example, if I happen to snap a photograph of Lady Gaga walking down Wilshire Boulevard in Hollywood, I wouldn't be entitled to post this photograph on my Etsy page in association with my business of making handbags. And of course, the reason for this is it might give the false impression that Lady Gaga endorses my handbag business. And what's important here is that the state of California, along with many other jurisdictions, have a right of publicity, which protects people's names and images from commercial use without their permission. So normally when we're taking photographs for commercial use, we'll always want to use a model release, getting permission to use that photograph. Now, I hasten to add in my discussion about the rights of street photographers that these are the rights in the United States, and they may be completely different in other parts of the world. So we need to be sensitive of other customs and traditions and political sensitivities in other places where we might want to take street photographs. I also have a set of personal limitations with respect to common sense and decency. And these limitations revolve around my desire generally not to impose my presence or my camera on people who aren't really able to protect themselves. For example, in the street, the mentally and physically ill. I also would never take a picture of someone who's publicly indisposed at the moment, maybe throwing up in the street corner after eating at the street cafe. Also, I'm very careful about taking pictures of children in public. Children are awesome to photograph. They do unexpected things, and their expressions and their energy can make for wonderful photographs. But as parents, we're really wary about people photographing our children. First of all, it doesn't make us feel safe when our children are identified in public online. Also, it's completely understandable that we're wary around people who are pointing cameras at our children. And for these reasons, I generally don't photograph children on the street unless they're part of some larger crowd. Now, I don't take street photos that are sexually exploitive or voyeuristic. It seems pervy and invasive to me, and my goal is just to capture interesting images, but not at the embarrassment or expense of others. This past August, I was taking photos as I was wandering around the Borghese Gardens of North Rome. It was a really hot and humid, sweltering day, and as I was descending down a set of stairs leading into the Piazza del Popolo, there were a group of teenagers that were climbing the stairs in the opposite direction. There was a teenage girl in this group, about 16 or 17. She was wearing a colorful COVID mask and a flowery sundress, and she was holding the sundress by the straps, flopping it up and down to stay cool in the sweltering heat. And as she reached down to grab the handrail, she somehow managed to step out of her dress and leave it a step or two behind her as she continued ascending up the staircase. At the time of this wardrobe malfunction, I was actually about 10 or 12 steps away and probably would not even have noticed through my own perspiration and heat exhaustion, but for the screaming of her girlfriends around her. And for a moment, everything froze and everyone turned to stare, and it was hard not to stare, just the surprise of it all, except for an old lady that was 2 or 3 steps below, who was struggling up the stairs wearing a long, hot dress. She may have been a nun, but she picked up the girl's dress and brought it up to her and helped the girl struggle into it over a period of what seemed to be 20 or 30 seconds when time really stood still. Now, to me at the time, this seemed like something of an Italian painting. This would have been a great opportunity to photograph something really beautiful and emotionally powerful, as this elderly woman was helping reorganize a dress through a cacophony of screaming teenage girls. And yet, no one raised their camera. It just wasn't an appropriate time to take a picture. Probably we were all just stunned at what had just happened, not just for the loss of the wardrobe, but also for the empathy we all felt for the young girl under the mask. No one there caught the picture. Hopefully there was an Italian artist somewhere on the staircase that day. And wardrobe malfunctions aside, we should also be respectful of personal space of people. It can really feel like assault when someone gets up in your face with a camera lens. I was working in a booth at the Consumer Electronics Show a few years ago, and a young engineer came up to me and stood just a few inches away from my face. Obviously, this was pre-COVID, wearing Google Glass, and I could tell from the glasses that he was recording the conversation, and I honestly felt a little uncomfortable talking to him as he was trying to walk through a legal problem he was having. It just didn't feel appropriate to have a camera up in my face in that moment. And in some circumstances, it could be assault to get too close with your camera to someone for a photograph, especially if it's someone with special sensitivities to their own personal space. If you have any other personal limitations that you as a street photographer abide to when taking photographs in public, I'd love to hear about them in the comments section below. That's all I really have to say today about the law of street photography. Thank you for watching my video. I look forward to seeing you next time.